My name is Jeff Deist. I'm a great friend of Morgan's, known him for many, many years, and he's off today. So he asked me to sub for him, and I said I would. Many of you may know the Mises Institute, which is my employer. The Mises Institute at Mises.org is a place for all of your alternative economics, let's just say. The kind of economics which Morgan talks about quite a bit on his show, week in and week out. The Austrian school, which is really a very different way of looking at what's going on out there. And boy, oh boy, do we need economics, because it sure feels like, if you've been following the news the last few days, I hope you had a great weekend. It didn't follow it too close. But, of course, we had the Supreme Court dump before they went into recess on Thursday and Friday, and we got this Dobbs decision, which deals with abortion, the longstanding Roe versus Wade precedent in this country. And so if you spend a lot of time in traditional media, the 24-hour talking head shows, or in social media, either way, you've probably been bombarded with news and opinion about abortion rules in this country. And here's my fear. My fear, ladies and gentlemen, is that these midterm elections coming up are going to be about abortion and guns and voting rights and trans and what we loosely call social issues. And, of course, everybody in Florida knows that those have been on the front burner a bit with Governor Ron DeSantis and his spats with Disney. But boy, oh boy, we have real economic problems in this country, real fiscal problems. We have, in my opinion, the potential for a real economic calamity in, let's say, the short term, the coming several years in this country. And we ought to be addressing it. And as much as I don't enjoy politics, as much as I wish we were more focused on economics in this country than politics, there is a political element to all of this. And so if this becomes a social issues election, and more importantly, if the country is just focused on social issues, as almost as a distraction to our underlying economic problems, whether that's the midterm elections or whether that's more generally what we call the culture war, red states versus blue states, the increasing polarization we're always reading about, and this Dobbs decision dealing with Roe v. Wade certainly accelerates that. It just makes me very concerned that we are glossing over the economic problems in this country. And Florida's been at the epicenter of this. I mean, especially since COVID, but even before that, people were to an extent voting with their feet. They were to an extent self-segregating. Certainly there's an urban-rural divide in this country. That's as much a cultural and almost sociological phenomenon as it is economic. But nonetheless, COVID intensified and accelerated that. And a lot of people, maybe regardless of their politics, were moving to places that were more open during COVID from a business perspective, from a travel perspective, from a day-to-day perspective with the masks and the mandates and the shutdowns. And Florida benefited enormously from this. But I don't need to tell all of you that as a result of this self-segregation, and a result also, I would argue, of all the tremendous money printing by Congress on the fiscal side and all the credit creation by the Fed on the monetary side, there's an awful lot of new money and credit out there sloshing around the system. So you combine increased demand to live in Florida with a lot more money and credit chasing the same amount of houses, or, well, there's some new houses being built, but not a lot, and not as fast as they need to be built in a country this vast. And so Morgan's listeners know that across Tampa, across St. Pete, across Clearwater, housing is a real problem. It's a real problem that it's going up and up and up. And so we assume, well, that's a good thing, Jeff. Gee whiz, my house is worth more. But we don't view it that way when groceries are going up or when gas is going up. You say, well, okay, but that's a consumable item. My house is an investment. Well, maybe it is. Houses go down sometimes, too. Does anyone remember 2007 to about 2012? Houses went down, 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 both not in nominal terms and very much so in real terms, which is to say inflation-adjusted terms. So I thought we'd do a little thought experiment this morning and go back 40 years and talk about the median housing price in the Tampa Bay region in 1982. Well, that was roughly $73,670 would have bought you the median house in Tampa. And, of course, that just means half the houses were cheaper and half were more expensive. Of course, it's not the average because that's very much skewed by there's some very luxury, expensive, multi-million-dollar homes in Tampa, of course, needless to say. So $73,000 roughly. Contrast that with 2022 where it's $453,770. So, 6-7 times as much. And why do we care about that? Well, in a sense, we don't care about the numbers per se, as long as your average salary or a Tampa resident's average salary went up that same 6 or 7x over those years, right? We don't care about the price of something as much as we care about the affordability. And the affordability relates to people's salaries and income, of course, and sometimes their savings rate. So, boy, $73,000 in 1982. But back then, let's say a 20% down payment would have cost you about $14,000 or $15,000. But so you would have ended up borrowing $55,000 to $60,000. But here's the kicker. Here's what people forget, and especially younger people. If you're under 40 or 50, you have no conception of this. But the average mortgage interest rate in 1982 on that house you were buying in Tampa was about 17%, folks. 17%. So even though the price of a house, the cost of a home was, 1/6 or 1/7, the monthly mortgage payment on a 30-year anyway was about half. It was about $850 versus about $1,683 today. And why is that? Well, that's because the average mortgage interest rate was 17% today, even with the increases of the last year. It's only about maybe 3.75%. And a year ago, folks, that was even less. A year ago, you could get a fixed rate if you were a prime borrower well below 2. And you should have if you could have, by the way. So, but even at 3.76%, that's about a $1,600 mortgage payment. And again, this is for the median house. I'm not saying that you can necessarily go out and buy a house for $453,000 in Tampa today without competing with a bunch of people that's going to, I don't know. That might not satisfy your housing preference. You might want a fancier place than that, or you might want a cheaper place than that. And the tragedy in all this, of course, the tragedy is that, yes, a lot of people's house is worth more, especially, let's just say it, that baby boomer generation that oftentimes has a house that's paid for, or perhaps that bought his or her house in Tampa back in the 70s or 80s, and it's nearly paid for, and they paid, again, that $73,000, where it's the younger folks today. It's the younger folks today whom I worry about, especially in markets like Tampa. They're very much struggling to pay rent, to make rent in these areas where rents are just going up and up and up. And as housing prices go up, more people are going to be forced into renting who may wish to buy. And the other thing is that landlords, understandably, want to increase rents when leases are up. That's the market, folks. And oftentimes, big rent increases, which are announced hopefully in advance by the landlord, they're almost an eviction. For lower income folks who are maybe surviving off welfare or disability payments, folks who are maybe surviving off a lower paid job, a minimum wage job. So if they get a $200, $300, $400, $500 monthly rent increase, they might be forced to move out. They might be forced to move farther out of town and then have to drive farther to make that monthly rent every month. So it's a tough situation in that sense. And boy, oh boy, you look at things that are right in front of our face, like housing prices, rent, gas, groceries, which we'll talk about in the next segment. Awfully hard to hide those from the population. This is the Morgan Streetman Show. This is Money Talk 1010 a.m. I'm your guest host, Jeff Deist. We got to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back after this. Stay with us. Happy Monday, Tampa.
Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.